Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Study Hall Day 2. We're going to be doing this more often, Monday through Friday, around 9, whenever I decide to make my coffee, pretty much. I just wanted to go over a couple of things on my method of study here. I'm using Professor Messer for my lectures. I am also using this lovely exam cram book. Let me go ahead and get that thing. Well, this is the physical. This is the 501 exam. We are studying for the 601 exam. I have the physical of this somewhere lying around, so this is going into my shelf to collect dust at some point in time. But those are the two sources I'm going to use for my exam. I'm really pushing for the exam cram here because I feel like it has enough material for you to confidently pass the exam. CompTIA exams aren't very hard. It's just you need to know how their test questions come at you, and once you figure out the pattern, then it's pretty straightforward. So that's why there's not too much that's going into this one. When I start doing things for like the Certified Ethical Hacker, maybe a Linux Plus, or a Pen Testing Plus certification, then I'll start doing multiple sources. But for anybody that's new and trying to get into CompTIA and whatnot, or trying to do self-study, some of the pointers that I have are you really need to immerse yourself into the subject matter. If you're coming from like a background, a non-technical background, or even a technical background like me, but going in for a deeper dive into the material, I think it's important for you to immerse yourself with study materials. It's not enough for you to just practice for the exam. You have to live it. You have to breathe it. You have to do. And so part of that is I've been doing a lot of reading in my off time. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and stream myself reading in front of all you guys. That's fucking boring. So anyway, some of the books that I've been reading are The Art of Invisibility by Kevin Mitnick. Another one that I want to pursue at some point in time will be Techless Hacking by Johnny Long. I like a lot of Johnny Long stuff. He's real good at that social engineering thing, right? And I've been reading it like as I'm gonna go pick up my roommate from work, or if I'm in the bathroom. But the point is when I first started reading it, it was only like maybe 3 or 4 pages at a time, but now that I've been doing it and making it a habit, I'm like halfway done with the book now. So shows that if you keep going at it every single day, I promise you, results will happen. But you have to be honest with yourself. You have to really put in the time. You really got to consecrate yourself to it. And you have to put in the effort. Otherwise, like most things in life, it's not going to come together. Otherwise. So with that said, let's go ahead and practice what I preach, right? And we're going to continue with the CompTIA Security Plus.
Malware is malicious software. It's software that is going to do something that will probably have a negative impact on you. Very often, malware will be set up to gather information from your machine. It will collect keystrokes, it'll collect information that's on your screen, and it will send that information off to the attacker. There's also malware that would cause your computer to be controlled by a third party. This is software that would turn your computer into a bot, and it would participate with much larger group of computers called a botnet. There would then be a third party, the attacker, who would be able to control all of those systems and have those computers participate in a denial of service attack, visit different websites, or do whatever they would like your computer to do because they've installed that malware on your system. There's also malware that might show advertisements on your computer, and on every advertisement, some money goes back to the malware owner. If they can distribute this to 1 million different computers, they can make quite a lot of money by simply adding malware to your system for advertising. And some of the worst malware these days is malware that might encrypt all of your private files on your computer and require you to pay to get the decryption key from the attacker. In the next series of videos, we'll look at many different types of malware. We'll look at viruses and how they might differ from crypto malware. We'll also see how ransomware and crypto malware are closely related. We'll investigate how worms can be used to transfer their malware from system to system without any type of human intervention. We'll also talk how Trojan horses can fool you into installing malware on your own systems. You'll also learn about rootkits, keyloggers, adware and spyware, and botnets. Malware can find itself onto our systems in many different ways, and once the malware begins the process of installing itself, it can use other types of malware to install other types of software on your computer. For example, your computer might be susceptible to a vulnerability that a worm might take advantage of, and the worm would then install some initial malware onto your computer. That malware might have a remote access backdoor that is then going to pull other software down to your computer and install additional software and malware on top of that. There might even be a botnet included with that malware. So now once this worm has installed the malware, a botnet has been installed and your computer now participates with all of the other computers that are in that botnet. That is just one of many different ways that malware can install itself and disrupt the normal operation of your computer. There are many different ways that you can prevent the installation of malware. One is to never click a link inside of an email message. The malware authors will send you an email that looks legitimate and looks like it's something you should be clicking, but instead it's going to download and install malware all because you clicked the link that's in that email. Malware authors will also use websites to embed their links and have pop-up messages to entice you to click those links and download the software so that they can then run that malware on your local computer. They might also use these web pages to automatically download software to your computer and then encourage you to run that software using a technique called a drive-by download. And if the operating system happens to have a vulnerability that might be exploited by a worm, this would be a common way to have malware installed onto your system. That's why it's so important to always maintain the latest security updates on your computer. Vulnerabilities can also be found within the applications that run in your operating system, so make sure that you update not only the OS, but all of the applications running on that operating system as well.
Okay. Next. So I've done a lot of this already, so I'm just glancing at it and making sure that I didn't miss anything.
Virus is malware that can reproduce itself, but one of the unique characteristics of a virus is that it needs you, the end user, to click on or launch that application to start the virus replication process. This is something that differentiates a virus from a worm. The virus needs a human being to start the process, whereas a worm can jump from machine to machine without any human intervention whatsoever. Once the end user has launched the executable that starts the virus, it can use the existing file system or the network to replicate itself. What happens next depends on the virus itself. Some viruses are very malicious, can delete files, can encrypt your data, and can cause some serious problems on your computer, whereas other viruses may be relatively benign. They may simply put advertising on your screen, or they may be simply gathering information from your computer, and you may have no idea the virus is even installed. This is one of the main reasons we keep antivirus software running on our computers. It's able to recognize when a virus is starting, and then it can stop the virus before it begins to execute. It's always important to keep our signatures updated so our antivirus software can recognize and stop these viruses from executing. We tend to put viruses into different categories. One of the most common virus types is a program virus, whereas the virus is part of an application that is running, and you clicking on that application or launching that application is what causes the virus to execute on your system. A relatively rare virus these days is a boot sector virus. This is a virus that exists in the boot sector of your storage device, and when you start your computer, the virus itself is launched. All you have to do is start the operating system, and the virus is started along with the boot sector. Some viruses operate as scripts on your system. They may operate as a script in the operating system, or they might be a script that runs inside of your browser. Another type of virus that's very similar to a script virus is a macro virus. A macro virus is usually running inside of another application. These are commonly associated with Microsoft Office apps. A newer style of virus is a fileless virus. It is a virus that never installs itself or saves itself as a file on your file system. This is a method that the virus uses to try to avoid some of the techniques that the antivirus software uses, especially if the antivirus software is looking at what you save to a storage drive. If the virus is never saving itself to the storage drive, then it may be able to evade the antivirus software. Instead of existing as a file that might execute, the fileless virus operates solely in the memory of the computer. Once it's started, all of the operations happen inside of RAM, and nothing is ever written to the storage drive on your system. A common way to execute a fileless virus is to click a link on a website or click a link that's inside of an email. This will then download software that will run as a Flash file, a Java file, or perhaps it takes advantage of a Windows vulnerability to begin executing. These vulnerabilities in Flash or Java or Windows might allow a script to be run in PowerShell, for example. PowerShell would then download the virus from a third-party website and then execute that virus in the memory of your local computer. Once this virus is executing in the memory of your system, it can encrypt files, it can delete information, it can exfiltrate data, and do anything else that you as an end user may have access to run on that computer. And since the virus writers would like to have this fileless virus execute again later, they might even change your registry so that this entire process can start itself all over again every time you boot your computer. As we mentioned earlier, a traditional virus requires an end user to click on an executable and start the process. But a type of virus that doesn't need any type of user intervention is a worm. A worm takes advantage of a vulnerability in operating systems or applications to be able to move itself from system to system without requiring any type of user intervention. Worms take advantage of the connectivity we have on our local networks and our internet-connected systems to be able to move very quickly and very easily from computer to computer. These worms are so good at propagating themselves that it's not unusual for hundreds of thousands or even millions of systems to be infected in a very short period of time. Once the worm has been identified and a signature has been created, we can usually stop the propagation of the worm at the firewall or the IPS. This obviously requires that we know the worm exists and that we can create a signature for it. And it also requires that you're able to put a firewall or an IPS in place between two systems so that you can block that flow of communication. A major worm infestation occurred on Friday, May the 12th of 2017. This is the Wannacry worm. This worm not only propagated itself automatically because it was a worm, but it also was very destructive because it installed crypto malware and began encrypting people's personal files. This started with a system that was already infected, and it began looking for other vulnerable systems. This worm took advantage of a vulnerability in Microsoft's Server Message Block version 1, or SMB v1, and it used an exploit called Eternal Blue to be able to find other systems that are on the network and then infect those systems. Once another vulnerable system was identified by the Eternal Blue worm, then it installed a backdoor application called Double Pulsar. Double Pulsar then downloaded the Wannacry ransomware and began encrypting the files on the person's computer. This process then automatically began again. The worm was able to propagate itself from computer to computer without needing any type of human intervention.
Okay, so they talk a lot about Wannacry. I've seen this at least in 3 different course materials. Well, at least 2 different course materials now, and it's been mentioned in a lot of other security reading materials like The Art of Invisibility. So this Wannacry virus is quite famous. Oh man, my favorite: ransomware and crypto malware.
Very often, the most valuable thing we own is our data. This may be documents that we keep stored on our computer or family videos or photos that can't be replaced. The data owned by a company is even more valuable. This might include planning documents of the company, employee PII or personally identifiable information, financial information, or proprietary and private data that only the company would have. With all of this valuable data on our systems, what if all of it suddenly disappeared? How much would you pay to get all of that data back? There is a number, and the attackers know that you will be willing to give them money if they could restore access to your files.
Globally, I'd say
this method of taking away your data and requiring you to pay to get that data back is called ransomware. This is a very popular way that the attackers are starting to make a lot of money by embedding malware on your system and requiring you to send them Bitcoin or some other kind of payment. Early forms of ransomware weren't even real. They were hoaxes. This is an example of a ransomware hoax that says that inappropriate information was found on your computer by the Department of Justice of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and to unlock your system, you have to pay a fine of $200. The reality is that no inappropriate information was found on this computer. This message is not from the Department of Justice, but it is malware that has locked the computer. And in some cases, a security professional may be able to remove this malware and you would gain access to the system again. The attackers realized very quickly that having a hoax as part of the ransomware wasn't good enough. They really needed a way to lock your personal files and your private information. So they created a new form of ransomware called crypto malware. Crypto malware uses cryptography to be able to encrypt all of your personal information and make it so that none of that information can be decrypted unless you have the proper key. The way that you obtain that key is that you send the attackers money or Bitcoin, and they will send you the key that will then decrypt all of your personal information. This is the infection screen shown with Wannacry, which tells you that your files have been encrypted. It explains what happened to your computer, how you can recover your files, and most importantly for the attacker, how you pay to get the key to decrypt all of your personal information. There are some relatively simple ways to protect yourself against ransomware. One of the most obvious ones is to always have a good backup. And this needs to be a backup that is not an online backup or an immediately accessible backup from your computer. That's because ransomware looks at all of the things connected to your computer, and if they find a backup, they will also encrypt the backup that you've created. This is also why we tell people to always maintain the security patches on your system so that all of those known vulnerabilities are not available to this ransomware. The same thing applies to the applications that you run on your computer to make sure there's no vulnerabilities with those, and you want to be sure that your antivirus and anti-malware software are always running the latest signatures. If your system is up to date and you have a known good backup, even if the malware was able to get onto your system and ransomware was to be installed, you would still be able to recover everything from your backup, and you'd be back up and running without having to send any money to the attacker.
Or, you could pull a Jim Browning and then hack them, tap into their camera, and then fuck with them some more. One day I want to get on that level, where I do some hacktivism.
In history, a Trojan horse was a large wooden horse that was used by the Greeks to capture Troy from the Trojans. In our computers, there is a digital version of this Trojan horse used by attackers to be able to sneak their software onto your system. This Trojan horse software is software that pretends to be something else, and it looks like software that is perfectly normal. You may think you're installing a spreadsheet, an imaging editing program, or a game, but in reality, you're installing malware that's only pretending to be that software. Trojan horse software is not only designed to look innocuous to you, it's also designed to look non-threatening to your antivirus software. And very commonly, Trojan horse software can get onto your system, disable all your security tools, and then have free reign of your computer. Now that the Trojan horse is running, it can configure backdoors or download additional malware to install on your system. One type of software that's commonly downloaded by this Trojan horse software is a PUP. This is a potentially unwanted program. This may not be malicious software, but it could be undesirable and may cause performance problems on your computer. For example, it might install a browser toolbar that becomes very difficult to uninstall or remove from your browser. Or it may be a backup utility that constantly shows advertising even when it's not backing up. Or it might be software that hijacks your browser, and every time you try to search something in Google, it redirects you to a different search engine. Here's a list of potentially unwanted programs that I found on one of my very infected Windows systems, and it's a mixture of software that's designed for backups. Looks like there is a download process and a toolbar that's installed, and these potentially unwanted programs with names like Conduit, My PC Backup, Spigot, and Mobo Genie were very easily found by my anti-malware software. We've mentioned earlier that when malware finds itself a way to run on your computer, one of the things that it tends to do is to open up a backdoor on your system. That's because it's very, very difficult to find vulnerabilities and to get users to click on these links. And once malware is running, it wants to find a way to easily reconnect to your system later on without having to go through that very difficult process again. To be able to do that, it starts up some new software on your computer that opens a backdoor. This would be very similar to the backdoor of your house. The malware simply creates a new way to get into your system without having to go through the front door. What's interesting about some of these backdoors is that the same backdoor process can be used by multiple types of malware. So once one type of malware gets onto your system, other types of malware are able to get into and infect your computer through that same backdoor that was created originally. You might even find that software or hardware that you thought was secure may also include a backdoor into its code. For example, very old versions of Linux had a backdoor that was built into the kernel. And you might also find that applications and other equipment that's connected to your network might inadvertently include backdoors as part of the software that's running on those systems. A type of software that attackers might install as part of the backdoor is a remote access Trojan, or a RAT. You might also hear this referred to as a remote administration tool. This is a remote access tool that gives a third-party access to your computer to have nearly complete control over the operating system. The malware that gets installed onto a computer might install this remote access Trojan, and from that point on, the third party is able to access your computer remotely and control many aspects of what the operating system is doing. It can collect a log of all the keys you press, including your usernames and passwords. It might record the screen or take screenshots and transfer those back to the attacker. It can copy files either from your computer or to your computer, and of course, it can then run and embed more malware on your system. This is a screenshot from the attacker's perspective, who's taking advantage of a system that's infected with the dark comet rat. And you can see this graphical administration front end allows the attacker to perform many different functions. They can change the configurations of the registry, they can run scripts, they can transfer files, or even restart the computer, all from this graphical administration front end. The process of preventing a Trojan or a rat from running on your system is very similar to preventing any other type of malware. You don't want to click any unknown links or links inside of your emails. You always want to be sure that your antivirus software is running and that you have the latest signatures installed for that software. It's always good to have a backup so that if a system does become infected and you're not able to remove that software, you can easily restore your system from that known good backup.
Okay. Explain that into layman's terms is a comment that I got from my buddy here. Didn't realize that people are watching this today. So rats and Trojans and that kind of stuff. I realized that he's kind of going into this without any sort of context. So a Trojan, just like in the Odyssey and the Iliad, a Trojan is a virus that passes itself off as a normal file, like, a JavaScript file, a Flash file, even to the point of like looking like a Word file, because playing For Honor while listening. No, so the whole point of a Trojan and a rat is for you to gain access to the system, posing as an innocuous file, but what it really does is it opens up a session for you to gain control of the computer, so that you can either pull data, you can destroy you can destroy the registry, so forth and so on. The point of most security compromises is to gain access to either a local node or, money in the bank is usually gain control of a server. Once you gain control of something like a main domain controller, you pretty much have leverage on an entire organization. Assuming that it's like, one of the main DCs and you're able to port that data into something else meaningful. So, again, the point of all of these and going over what each kind of attack is to identify the types of attacks that are out there in the real world. How often does this happen? Oh, this happens all the time, guys. And this next one, rootkits. This is like, this is like the new thing to do. It's like the new-ish thing to do with security. But what a rootkit does is, in a lot of open source code that's built off of like Bash, which is part of the terminal language on Mac, or even Terminal, root is pretty much sudo access. Sudo access is, the end of all administration in most non-Windows based operating systems. What this does is, if you have the idea of a rootkit is that you have a rogue administrator account that is pretty much like all other compromises, gaining control of the machine. So let's see what Messer has to say about this.
The term rootkit has a foundation in Unix or Linux, where root is the administrative account on that particular system. But rootkits can be found on any operating system, Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and anything else. A common characteristic of a rootkit is instead of modifying files in your operating system, it's modifying files in the kernel of the operating system. These are the foundational building blocks of the operating system, and everything that runs in the OS runs on top of that kernel. Because this malware now becomes part of the operating system itself, it effectively becomes invisible to antivirus and anti-malware software. And that's one of the reasons why identifying and removing a rootkit from a system can be a very difficult process. Malware authors were starting to combine rootkit functionality with their malware functionality to create a botnet that would be very difficult to remove from a system.
This one's
a good example
too.
of malware that was starting to combine a rootkit with the malware itself was the Zeus or the Zbot malware. This was malware that was very good at transferring money out of your bank account and into the bank account of the malware author. They combined the Zeus malware with the Kneakers rootkit. This created a type of malware that once it was installed, it made it almost impossible to delete it from your system. Anytime you would try to delete the files, the rootkit would be part of the operating system and would prevent you from deleting any part of the botnet malware. If you tried to stop the Windows process the malware was using, the access would also be denied. Anything that you tried to do to stop that malware from running would be stopped by the underlying rootkit in the operating system. There are some anti-malware and antivirus software that can look for and identify rootkits that may be running on a system. And there are specific rootkit removers that are designed to remove specific variants or specific types of rootkits. Fortunately, we've created new types of BIOS software, such as the UEFI BIOS, that includes a feature called Secure Boot. This Secure Boot feature will look to see if any part of the kernel has been changed, and it will not boot a system that may have been modified, thereby preventing rootkits from being installed on our modern systems.
Okay. So, the problem with the rootkit as to why it's so difficult to flush that thing out is it's kind of predicated on the status of your admin account. If you root a system, okay, so like take your Android cell phone device here, right? If you root that thing and you don't know what the user credentials are, then you pretty much have a rogue administrator account. You have a sudo that's never been touched. So if someone was just creating a vanilla version of Linux, what I could potentially do before they touch it is I could run a script and hijack that account, and then suddenly I have sudo access. That's what the pitfall of that is. And this isn't exactly something that can be rooted out by your antivirus files because, well, let me explain how an antivirus works. What it does is the modern antivirus is going to be on the cloud these days, right? So most of the heuristic files, which are the files that identify a malware threat, are stored in the cloud amongst multiple databases. So I think that the modern consumer-facing antivirus is pretty neat. But because it's based on those heuristic files, it's not really going to detect it. That's just like, trying to detect a memory virus. Memory viruses are especially dangerous because memory is volatile. And so those files will just magically appear and disappear at will. And if it's not being written into the hard drive, then you're not going to find it. No antivirus is actually going to do it. So let's go ahead and continue here. These are all access credential so far. Well, this one is access credential compromise. But let's look at this one. Ooh, spyware. Spyware has been around, forever. It's pretty much your cookies in your browser are listening to everything that you say. It's a scary sort of thought, but not to, to break your spirits here, guys, but, as long as you're plugged into the internet, you're not safe. That is the harsh reality of things. And, everyone wants to say their platitudes of, oh, I don't have any data worth hacking. You say that up until you get hacked, and then suddenly you squirm. And, if you're saying that, oh, all my data is ransom, is for naught anyway, well then there are plenty of entities, malicious entities that would love to get a hold of that data to add to their, working model of what a victim would look like, so that they can impersonate other people or impersonate you in the back end. So let's go ahead and continue.
If your computer's infected with adware, then you're seeing advertisements almost everywhere on your system. They're inside of your browser, they're on your Windows desktop. Everywhere you look, there's probably an advertisement to be seen. This can cause performance problems in your operating system, it can cause slowdowns inside of your browser, and you'll probably see an increase in traffic across the network. This adware can sometimes be installed accidentally. Sometimes when you're installing one application, it will install additional applications along with it, and sometimes those additional applications include adware. If you try to remove adware, you may find applications that say they are specifically designed to remove adware, but what you may find is that software itself is malware or adware. Always use known good antivirus and anti-malware software if you ever need to remove adware. Spyware is a bit more malicious than adware because it's trying to find out things about you or to gather information about you. Spyware might be looking to see where you visit on the internet. It might be trying to identify personal information about you so that it can use that for identity theft and anything else that it may be able to use by spying on you. Spyware can be installed a number of different ways, and often it's a Trojan horse. You think you're installing some peer-to-peer software or security software, but in reality, you're installing spyware. Some of the most common spyware will examine the types of pages that you visit in your browser, identify some of the sites that you're visiting, and capture any keystrokes you may be typing in so that it can identify usernames, passwords, and other important information. It seems like adware and spyware is a type of malicious software that simply won't go away. That's because you as an individual are very valuable to the malware author. They know that if they can put advertisements in front of you, that they can make money by making you watch those ads. They can spread these ads across thousands or even millions of users' desktops, meaning that they can multiply the amount of money and time and resources being used to watch those advertisements. And of course, if they can install spyware and track your usernames and passwords, they could potentially gain access to important financial information or your bank accounts. Like most malware prevention, you need a good antivirus and anti-malware software installed, and you want to be sure your signatures are always up to date. You also want to be sure you know exactly what you're installing. Installing unknown software from a third-party website is probably a pretty high risk for adware or spyware. Once this malware gets onto your system, it's very difficult to remove it. The adware authors do not want you removing their adware or their spyware. And in some cases, it may be almost impossible to completely remove that malware from your system. That's why it's so important to have a known good backup. That way you can delete everything on your system and restore everything to the way it was before you were infected. And you may find some software that is specifically written to be able to remove this type of malware. The Malwarebytes anti-malware for Windows and for Mac are very good examples of software that is specifically written to clean your system of this very annoying type of malware.
I want to share a funny with you guys in a minute. Here we go. As you can see, my mother's web browser is a little infected here. No, this isn't my mom's web browser. This is an example of all the tracking cookies and toolbars that they're talking about. My God, they've downloaded everything. So, this is like, oh, what is that? Oh, that looks like Vista. Or no, I'm sorry, that looks like Windows 7. Looks like a Windows 7 laptop. That. Or it could be Vista. But, okay, well, anyway, point is your web browser should not look like this. This is not healthy, guys. Like, by any means or any measure or any standard, this is not healthy. Alright? So, yeah. What can you do about this? Reset your browser, start over. My gosh. You should not. No. Just, I cringe every time I look at this. Okay, I need to remove this because it's making me uncomfortable about things. And yeah, what are we talking about here? Yeah, spyware. Well, yeah. Spyware is annoying. Oh yeah, no, I had a point about this. So, going back on what I was saying about your information may not be worth hijacking, well, maybe I should explain, the why or the how behind all of this, right? Your information is actually worth hijacking, whether you perceive it to be valuable or not. It doesn't always have to be financial data that's being mined. What a good attacker is trying to do is try to get a holistic understanding of their target. Who are you? Who do you associate yourself with according to your text messaging habits? Who are you according to your web browsing habits? What times do you usually log in? Do you lock your computer? Do you not lock your computer? All of that is recorded on your computer in log files. And so if someone gets, an idea of the behavior of your target, then they can carry out an attack while you're asleep. Or while you're not home and at work, when your computer is still logged into the internet. Honestly, the best thing to do when you leave, if you have a home PC and whatnot, turn the machine off. Just turn it off. It's very hard to do wake on LAN. Well, unless you configure it for wake on LAN. But anyway, point is just turn the PC off. And if you want to be extra paranoid about it, turn the power strip off until you come home. And then power the PC back on. Something like that. But by gaining even, small shreds of information on who you are, your attacker has a holistic understanding of who you are as a consumer, as a target. So, the ever so famous bots and the botnets. So I learned something pretty cool about the way the modern bot and the modern botnet is. I learned that what people are doing is they're renting licenses of like VMware. And so what they're doing is they have an image, like, an operating system image of a compromised computer. And they sit down and they clone those machines, in the cloud, and then carry out, their DOS or their DDoS attacks that way. And then when XYZ, regulation body gets a hold of that and tries to limit the amount of traffic that's passing through, then what the attacker should do is collapse all the VMs and then lay low for a little bit and then, do it again in waves. Or it could be groups of individuals all doing this to create, large botnet farms, temporary botnet farms to sit down and attack an organization. These are usually mass attacks here. Happens a lot. You know what? Maybe I should show this one. Let's see. What's going on in the world today, right? Messer shows this one every once in a while here. This threat map. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this well, I'm gonna put it on its own instance here. And I am going to add the source. I want to illustrate how often does this happen in real life, right? I will show you how often this happens in real life. Okay, so this is a free website to access here, map.lookingglasscyber.com. This shows, this is a threat map. This identifies globally, the threats that are attacking, or the threats that are happening across the world. So over here you see the countries: India, China, Egypt, Iran, Russia. So with that said, before I continue, I do not want this to be a political sort of statement, but however, look at the countries that are pumping out these compromises. Just throwing that out there. This is not about the politics of the world or even of the United States, but this is what is happening in the world right here, right now. This is all in real time. Look at this. Egypt, India, US. US has very little. And look at Europe. Europe is just bombarded. Look at China. Look at India. These botnets are just coming up and then collapsing, at will before they get traced. So in real time, how often is this happening? Every day, every hour, all the time. Mostly coming from India. So that's pretty neato. So let's go ahead and move on.
The malware term bot stands for robot, and it's a term to describe the automation that occurs behind the scenes when your system is taken over by this type of malware. Once it gets on your computer, it can control almost any aspect of your operating system. This type of software is installed on your system through a Trojan horse, through a vulnerability in an operating system or an application, or alongside an application that you're installing normally. The bot malware on a computer is working along with other computers that are infected with the same bot malware to create a botnet. This botnet is controlled through a command and control server, or CNC server. The CNC server is responsible for sending out commands. Those commands will be received by the botnet, and then the botnet will perform whatever function has been asked of it by the CNC. As you can imagine, all of these systems under the control of somebody nefarious can create some significant problems. Having all of these systems work together can create a massive denial of service. And because it's so many different systems located in so many different places, it's a DDoS, a distributed denial of service. These systems can also act as proxies or relays for spam, network traffic, and other types of tasks. And very large botnets can be rented out to third parties, effectively creating a distributed denial of service as a service. If you'd like a view of what botnets may be active anywhere in the world at any time, you can visit map.lookingglasscyber.com, and you can see the number of infections per second, live attacks, the number and type of botnets, and the countries where those botnets are communicating. One way to stop a botnet is to make sure that it's not installed in the first place. So you want to be sure that your operating system and your applications are running the latest security patches, and make sure that your antivirus and anti-malware software have all of the latest signatures. You can often identify an active infection by scanning an on-demand anti-malware scan and watching the network for any unusual traffic patterns. And if you know the type of network flows that will be used for the command and control, you can block that at the firewall or with an IPS or firewall at the workstation level.
Alrighty. I'm a little rusty on this one, so we're going to go ahead and sit here and dutifully listen.
A logic bomb is a type of attack that occurs when a separate event is triggered. Very commonly, these logic bombs are left by disgruntled employees or someone who has a grudge against an organization. One very common type of logic bomb is a time bomb. This is one that occurs when a particular date and time is reached. A logic bomb can be more than just a date and time that's reached, of course. You could have certain other events occur. If someone places a file in a particular folder, that may be what causes this particular logic bomb to execute. Or perhaps someone turns on or off a computer, and that is the trigger that causes the bomb to go off. It's difficult to identify if a logic bomb has been placed in a system because it doesn't follow any known signature. It's not possible for antivirus or anti-malware to automatically recognize that a logic bomb may exist. It also might be difficult to gather evidence after the fact because many logic bombs will delete themselves once they've executed. A good example of a time-based logic bomb occurred on March 19th of 2013 in South Korea. There were organizations in South Korea that were primarily media organizations and banks that received email messages that had malicious attachments in them. They looked like they were emails from a bank. And if someone ran that attachment, a Trojan installed malware on those systems. And a day later, on March 20th at 2 p.m. local time, the bomb activated and it began deleting master boot records and rebooting systems. Without a master boot record, these systems restarted and showed that a boot device was not found. Please install an operating system on your hard disk. Not only did this affect many workstations and servers, it also disabled many automatic teller machines throughout South Korea. A more disruptive type of time bomb occurred on December 17th of 2016 at 11:53 p.m. in Ukraine. This focused on high voltage substations. These were the substations that sent power between different locations within the country. And at this particular time, the logic bomb began disabling electrical circuits and bringing down electrical connections throughout the country. The malware that had been installed had begun mapping out the control network of these systems and began disabling power at a particular date and time. This malware was customized to work with these SCADA networks. These are the supervisory control and data acquisition networks that are used to manage these types of electrical systems. As I mentioned earlier, it's difficult to know when someone may have installed a logic bomb because there's no known signature that you can use to alert you that something has been identified as a logic bomb. But there are things you can do with your processes and procedures to help prevent a logic bomb from being installed in the first place. A good example of this might be to have a formal set of processes and controls if any changes are made in the environment. That way, if you notice that something has been modified on a server, but there were no plans and no processes in place to make those changes, that might be suspicious and might cause you to do a little more research into what might have changed on that system. There are also automated processes of doing this. You can configure host-based intrusion prevention or applications like Tripwire that will look for certain changes to occur. And if those changes happen, you'll be alerted and notified that someone tried to make a change to that system. And of course, it's important to have constant auditing of these alert systems and the computer systems themselves. System administrators, for example, have full control to these systems. So it's good to have an auditing process in place to make sure that all of the changes that are being made are authorized.
So this is just a cautionary tale then, right? It's that whole, in technology, if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality, or, if it's continually working, why you upgrade mentality is a very dangerous sort of mentality to have, because in the real world, the way it works is once an exploit is discovered, then your software is pretty much dead in the water. Once an encryption is hacked and revealed all the way through, it's not useful anymore, which is why we're at 256 bits. The 56-bit encryptions and the 128 DES encryptions were, not as robust. So that's why they're phased out, and that's why we have new security standards. But hence, with programming and hence with the applications that you're running on your computer, it's best for you to have the most up-to-date software in general. And like he said, a formal change control, aka having a backup server that's read-only, promoting that into a main controller, and then migrating all of your data into that controller, and switching up the credentials as needed. That is absolutely necessary for this, or to mitigate this. Again, remember, no such thing as 100%. The best you can do is try to, mitigate further damage or stop the attack. A wall is always built de facto of an attack. That's warfare in general. Password attacks. Okay, this one's good. Again, don't leave your passwords underneath your keyboards, on your monitors, on the sticky note, on a physical, and then on your local machine. When you're going to secure your passwords, use something like KeePass or, a password keeper. The ultimate would be to have KeePass generate passwords for you for specific sites, so that neither you or the attacker is privy to them. So, and of course, locking your passwords away or storing them somewhere is no substitute for encryption.
An attacker loves applications that store passwords as plain text. They take the password, they store it in a readable format in a database, and if the attacker finds this database, then they have access to everyone's usernames and passwords without any additional work. Obviously, if you are storing login credentials, you don't want to store any passwords as plain text. Fortunately, this is a very unusual situation if you ever run into it, but there are the rare applications that tend to save these passwords in a form that is readable to anyone. Unfortunately, if you run into one of these situations, you don't have much of a choice. You need to stop using that particular application or find an upgrade to that application that doesn't store any of these passwords as plain text in the database. Well, if you don't store password as plain text, how should you store passwords? The best way to store a password is in a format that uses a hash. This hashing of a password takes the password and represents the password as a string of text information. We call this a message digest. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as a fingerprint. The idea with a hash is you can provide an input to the hash like your password, and the resulting hash is something that is very unique. So hashes will not be duplicated on a system, and they'll be very specific to a particular password. The reason a hash makes such a perfect place to store a password is that it is a one-way trip. It's a cryptographic algorithm that cannot be reversed. So once you create the hash of a password, you can't somehow restore that password back to its original format by simply using the hashed value. Here's an example of some hashes that I've created from some very common passwords. This hashing algorithm is the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. It's a very common one to find. Here's some passwords that I've hashed. If you hash 123456 with SHA-256, you get this message digest. You'll notice this is very different than the 123456. You're not able to tell what this password might be by looking at the hash, and there's no way to reverse the hash back to that original password. I've also got hashes here for 123457 for the word QWERTY and the word password. You'll notice that all these hashes are the same length, but all of them are very, very different than the original passwords that were used as the input. Inside of the application or the operating system that you're using, you'll often have a password file that then has the usernames for the user and then the hash that is created from the password for each individual account. Instead of trying to brute force the hash and determine what the original password might have been, some attackers will use a spraying attack. A spraying attack avoids the results of a locked account for trying the wrong password over and over again without success. Instead, a spraying attack is going to try to use some very common passwords and only try a few of them before moving on. A good example of some of these common passwords can be found on Wikipedia under the list of the most common passwords. And the top 5 passwords I put right here, which are 123456, 1234567899, QWERTY, password, and 12345677. Probably not unusual that these would be the top 5 passwords that someone would try to use. So an attacker using a spraying attack would try an account name, and then they might try the top 3 of these top passwords to see if any one of those happen to be in use. If they gain access by using these top passwords, they can then continue their attack. If they do not gain access by using these top passwords, then they stop what they're doing, they move on to the next account, and they try these top 3 passwords again. By only trying a few passwords for a single account, they can often avoid any alarms, alerts, or account lockouts that might signal that somebody's trying to break into these accounts. Some attackers, though, are interested in obtaining the username and password of every account on a system. And if they want to be able to determine what those passwords are, then they'll need to perform a brute force attack against every account. A brute force attack is going to try every combination of letters, numbers, special characters, or anything that could make up a password, and it's going to try every combination of those for a single account until it finds a matching password. This can obviously take some time. If it's a very long password, you have to go through a lot more iterations to be able to find that. And if you're starting with the hash of a password, then you also have to perform that hash so that you can then compare the hashes to see if you found a match. Let's say that an attacker has gained access to a system and they've downloaded the password file that contains usernames and password hashes. Now they happen to have one of the hashes associated with a particular user, and they would like to perform a brute force attack to find the password associated with that hash. They'll start at the very beginning of what possible passwords might be, and the beginning here would be the password AAAAA. They'll perform a hash of that password, and they'll get the resulting hash value. They'll then compare that hash value to the hash value they're trying to match. They'll see that those don't match, so they'll go to the next password on their list, which is AAAAB. They'll perform a hash of that password. They'll compare that hash to the hash they're trying to match, and so on until they find one that matches. They may have to go through a very long list, but eventually they'll come up with the combination of letters that makes up the word password. They'll perform a hash of password, they'll get the hash value, and they'll see that the hash value of password matches the hash they were looking for. Therefore, the password associated with this account is the word password. If an attacker was trying to do this online, it would obviously be a very slow process as they were typing in a username and a password, and there's probably going to be delays as they try each wrong password. And very quickly, they're going to lock out this account because they're going to try 3, 5, or 7 passwords before the account is automatically disabled for brute force attacks. It's usually more common for the attacker to have already downloaded the password file. They can then perform an offline attack of those hashes where they can programmatically step through every possible combination and do it very quickly on their local machine. This obviously requires a lot of computational requirements on the local computer, but it allows them to go very quickly through this list of passwords. It obviously takes a long time to incrementally go through every possible combination of letters and numbers and special characters. So instead of going through all of those, some attackers will use a subset of those that you might find in a dictionary. We call this a dictionary attack, where we can use common words taken from a dictionary and see if those happen to be the passwords that we're looking for. You'll find a lot of different kinds of dictionaries on the internet, especially some groups of passwords that are unique to a particular type of job. For example, there might be a medical dictionary where there are a lot of medical phrases that you can use for passwords that may be from a hospital or an insurance company. These dictionary-related brute force programs can also perform letter substitutions. So if you're using the word password as your password, but you're changing the letter A to the ampersand and the letter O to the number 0, these programs are already expecting you to do that, and they'll try those combinations as they go through the dictionary attack. This type of cracking can take quite a bit of time as it goes through all of these different words and combinations of letter substitutions. It's not unusual for attackers to use a distributed cracking format where multiple systems might be used. They might also take advantage of the high-speed CPUs that you might find in a graphical processing unit or GPU. These external video cards are very high-capacity processors, and they can perform these calculations very quickly. So after performing a dictionary attack, they can go through and find common passwords like ninja, dragon, football, or let me in, and of course are able to identify the hashes associated with all of those. Well, if we're going through every possible iteration in a brute force attack and creating hashes to compare, one of the things you might want to do is save all of those hashes and simply do a quick search of those hashes in the future. This type of database that contains a massive number of hashes that was created earlier is called a rainbow table. This is an optimized table. You're able to search through it very, very quickly, and you're able to find passwords almost instantly on many of these types of rainbow tables. Because you don't have to go through the calculation process of creating the hash, especially with longer types of passwords, this type of rainbow table can be an almost instantaneous lookup to find all of the passwords that might exist in a single set of hashes. The challenge with rainbow tables is that each type of application or operating system may use a different method to create that hash. And if that is the case, then you'll have to have different rainbow tables that are specific to that particular application or that particular operating system. Another technique that all programmers should use when they're storing these passwords is to include a salt. A salt is a little bit of extra random data added to the password before it is hashed. This means that if two users happen to be using exactly the same password, the hash that's stored in the password table is going to be different between the two, even though their password is exactly the same, because a different type of random salt was added to each one of those users' passwords. This means that any pre-built tables like rainbow tables will not work if all of these passwords have been salted, because there's this randomness that has been added to every single password. Although this doesn't completely stop the brute force process, it does slow things down and requires that the attacker know exactly how the salt has been implemented so they can then process and begin the brute forcing of those passwords. Let's see what the hash looks like when we take a single password like the word dragon and we add a bit of salt to it. This is the hash you would see if there was no salt added to the password. We're going to take the password dragon and we'll add a different set of random salt for each individual user. You'll notice the hash for every single one of these users is very, very different, even though their password is exactly the same. This makes it very difficult for an attacker because they'll look at this hash and they'll have no idea that any of this information happens to be identical. A good example of what happens when attackers are able to get their hands on these hash passwords occurred in January of 2019 when a large collection of passwords was released called Collection Number 1. This consisted of over 12,000 files and 87 gig of data. Within collection number 1 was over 1.1 billion unique emails and passwords. This was a very large data breach. And within the collection, there were 772 million unique usernames across many different accounts. This meant that there could be as many as 773 million people that were affected by this data breach. Although there were over 1 billion unique emails and passwords, there were only 21 million unique passwords in this entire group. This is another good reason why you might want to have a password manager that makes a different password for every single one of your accounts. If you're interested in knowing if you are part of this data breach, you can go to this website, which is a legitimate and well-trusted website in the industry called haveibeenpwned.com. This site allows you to simply put in your email address and it will tell you if that address is part of one of many different breaches. And they're always adding new breaches to the list, so this should be a site that you're always going back to see if maybe your username and password may have been released.
All right, guys, I'm going to take a quick bathroom break here. All right, I am back. I'm just seeing how many more we have to do here. I think we should be able to... All right, we're right here in physical attack, so 1, 2, 3... Okay, these are newer stuff. Adversarial AI, cloud-based on-premise attack. So, and supply chain, that's new too. So, we're going to continue with at least this, because password attacks was kind of long. And then we'll stop there with the lecture for today, and then we'll do this tomorrow. But we're going to keep going.
Attacks aren't always done across the network. There are many attacks that are physical attacks. One type of physical attack might be with a malicious USB cable. This looks like a perfectly normal USB cable. We would use it to plug into our computer and charge our systems, except it has some additional electronics inside. It could, in fact, tell your operating system that it is a HID, or a human interface device. This is the categorization for keyboards and a mouse. So when you plug in this malicious USB cable, it's able to start typing anything that it would like into your system. So you might plug in the cable, it would start up a command prompt, it would type in some commands to download some malware from a third-party site, and now your system is infected. This is why you shouldn't simply plug in any USB cable that you happen to find. You need to have some trusted knowledge of where this cable came from and trust that it came from a reliable source. Similar to the malicious USB cable is the malicious flash drive. This may be a perfectly normal working flash drive, but it may have some additional electronics inside that could cause problems on your system. You might be walking through the parking lot, there's a flash drive on the ground, and most people would want to know what's on this flash drive and could they use this flash drive themselves. But plugging in this device is probably going to be a bad idea. In older operating systems, we automated the processes that occurred when you plugged in a flash drive and would have programs run automatically from that particular storage device. But obviously, this is a significant security concern, and in most modern operating systems, this automated functionality has been removed. But just as with our USB cable, we could still run things from a USB flash drive by adding additional electronics inside that have this device recognized as a HID, or human interface device. So it appears to be a keyboard or a mouse, and when you plug in the flash drive, you'll notice the command prompt will open, a lot of things start typing in, and suddenly your system is now infected with malware. Even without that human interface device functionality, there are ways for attackers to simply put files on the flash drive that might infect your system. For example, you can put malicious software inside of PDF files or have malicious macros run inside of spreadsheets. If your USB interface is configured with a boot device, you might forget that you have this USB drive installed, and when you restart the system, the USB drive infects your system during the boot process. Add some additional electronics, and this flash drive can turn into a wireless interface that can then act as a host for other devices to connect into your system, and you now become a jumping off point for an attacker who may want to gain access to your internal network. These are just some of the reasons why you want to be very careful about what USB devices you connect to your computer. Stealing credit card information has become a big business, and there's so many different ways that the bad guys are trying to gain access to our credit card numbers. One way they're able to do this is with skimming. This is stealing our credit card information as we use the card for some other purpose. It's copying information either from the magnetic stripe that's on that credit card, or it may be gathering information from the computer system that you're plugging it into. This would have your credit card number, expiration dates, the cardholder's name, and anything else that's on that magnetic stripe. The attackers are usually adding additional hardware to the card reader on the device that you're using. And if you're at an ATM, they may also have a camera that's monitoring what buttons you press when you put your PIN into the system. The attackers will obviously skim your credit card numbers and then use that information to perform other financial transactions. This is why you should always check very carefully when using a card reader. Maybe pull on the card reader itself and make sure it doesn't pop out of the system, and make sure that everything associated with that card reader looks like it is built into the original unit. Here's an example of a card reader where the attacker had to create a little bit of a wider connection to be able to fit their card reader in, and this piece of plastic on the inside is the one put there by the attacker. You can see they didn't do a very good job. They damaged the system itself, and if you walked up to this system and examined it prior to you putting your card in, you would notice that something about this did not look quite right. Some banks have tried to put some oddly molded plastic around the outside of their ATMs as a way to try to prevent somebody from adding their own skimmer into the system. They might also put some type of colored or lighted piece of plastic on the outside so you can see this is original to the ATM and not added by a third party. Sometimes attackers are going to use this credit card information that they've skimmed to perform online transactions. But sometimes the attacker needs another physical card to use. And in that case, they're going to clone the details of your card. They'll create an exact duplicate of your credit card with all the same numbers and information, and they'll put even the same CVC or card validation code on the back of the card as well. The attackers are cloning the magnetic stripe that's on the back of the card, so obviously they would only be able to use this card in transactions that took that magnetic stripe. The chips that are on the inside of our cards are not able to be duplicated and can't be cloned by the attackers. One very common use of magnetic stripes on cards is gift cards. The attackers will clone a gift card, they'll wait for that card to be activated, and then they'll use the gift card before the legitimate user is able to do so.
Ooh, that's real sneaky. Oh, I gotta know about this one. Adversarial AI. What is adversarial AI? Oh, man.
We're able to make our computers much smarter these days by using machine learning. Our computers are able to sift through enormous amounts of data, find different patterns within that data, and then be able to provide us with services or information based on the patterns that it finds. One challenge with doing this is that it takes a lot of data to be able to train our machine learning systems. If we're doing face recognition, we need to have our computers analyze millions of faces to see the nuances between every individual. If this is machine learning that's in a car, we need that car to understand all of the different things that can happen while somebody's driving on the road. This means we have to put a lot of data into these systems to be able to train it properly. But once we've done that, we can now start using this data. For example, our spam folder is able to capture a lot more spam because our system has been trained to recognize what spam might look like. Or if we're in an online retailer, we might see things pop up that are recommended for us based on what our past history is with that particular retailer. Or you might be on a streaming video service and it's able to offer you movies that it knows you would like based on its machine learning. And if we've trained our cars to recognize harmful situations, it may be able to keep us out of a car accident. All of this training data assumes that everything that's going into the learning process is legitimate data. But what if the attackers used malicious data or invalid data during the training process? That would mean that the resulting artificial intelligence would be invalid as well. A good example of poison training data occurred with a Microsoft AI chatter bot named Tay. Tay stands for Thinking About You, and Tay was added to Twitter on March 23rd of 2016. It interacted with Twitter users, was able to have conversations with people on Twitter, but Microsoft didn't add any type of anti-offensive behavior or anti-offensive learning algorithms to Tay. So once Tay started interacting with other users and other users realized that they could poison the learning process, they turned Tay into a racist, sexist, and inappropriate bot. And ultimately, Microsoft had to turn off Tay and end this particular project.
That's hilarious.
The users on Twitter knew that the artificial intelligence was only going to be as good as the programming and only going to be as good as the data going in during the training process. And if they could find holes or vulnerabilities in that training process, they could change the way the machine learning was able to understand the world around it. Attackers might also change their approach once the learning process is over. For example, if a spam filter has now learned what spam looks like, the attackers can slightly change the way they're formatting their spam messages and circumvent the machine learning that was done previously. For example, there have been cases where machine learning has used actual social security numbers and personal information, and attackers were able to interact with that machine learning after the training was over and extract those details and use that private information. That's why it's important during the learning process that all of the data going into the machine learning is legitimate. You might also want to retrain with new data occasionally and make sure that the machine learning is always up to date with the latest type of information.
So update your
And as a good security technologist, you might want to use some of the same techniques that the attackers are using just to make sure that your machine learning process does not become vulnerable.
That is hilarious. Becomes racist, sexist, and inappropriate on Twitter. That is hilarious. That's also scary. Yeah, machine learning is like the new thing. It's the big bad artificial intelligence. I didn't know what the compromises on AI would be and machine learning would be, but if you think about it at the core, it does kind of make sense. I had a teacher, perhaps he was much wiser than I had anticipated him to be, but he was one of my elementary school teachers. He said that the machine is dumb. It does not have any sentience. It does not know how to conduct itself. It is simply a machine that needs a user to interact with it. So with that said, you could approach AI using a similar mentality. It does not know. It doesn't have a moral compass. It doesn't exactly have sentience. So, it's relatively vanilla. Golden rule is you never want any piece of technology, whether it's physical, software, something advanced like cloud or, machine learning. You don't want that to be in the default configuration. Otherwise, this happens, But that is hilarious. I can't get over that. Like, that is hilarious that people are sitting down and teaching it to be racist and sexist. Oh, man. I've heard some scarier AI. Like, there was a Google AI that became self-aware, and they had to shut it down because it got all Ultron on them and saw humanity as its own problem. So, let's continue.
The supply chain is the chain of manufacturing that gets a product from the very beginning to the very end of its process. This includes the raw materials, suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, customers, and consumers. With all of these different points along the chain, there's a lot of opportunity for someone to be able to attack any one of these and affect anybody else who might be downstream in that chain. One of the reasons this works so well is that we tend to trust what we receive from our suppliers, not realizing, of course, that somewhere up the chain there was an attack that now has shown itself in the equipment, the software, or the technology that we're now putting onto our network. And with so many other steps before that technology arrives on our doorstep, there are plenty of places for an attacker to be able to infect that supply chain. A notable supply chain breach occurred in November of 2013 with the Target Corporation, where 40 million credit card numbers were stolen. This attack did not start at Target. It instead started in Pennsylvania for an HVAC company. That's a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. This is an organization that had people that took care of and maintained the HVAC systems for many of the Target locations. To be able to interact with Target, there was a VPN connection that these technicians would use to be able to send and receive information about these HVAC systems. There was an email with malware that was delivered to this firm in Pennsylvania, and that malware was able to obtain the VPN credentials so that the attackers were able to access the VPN themselves. This was the breach of the supply chain. The attackers were able to take advantage of the HVAC suppliers and gain access to the inside of the target network. Unfortunately, the target network did not have any additional security on the inside to prevent vendors from gaining access to other parts of the network. So once the attackers got onto the target network, they then had access to every single register at all 1,800 target stores. This is a good example of how a supply chain attack can occur because the attack vector isn't one you were expecting. The folks that are on the roof taking care of the air conditioning and heating are not where you would expect a breach to come that would then attack and steal over 40 million credit cards. Supply chain cybersecurity has become a significant concern for organizations. You have to know and trust that your server, your router, your
I need to go back because I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry.
The supply chain is the chain of manufacturing that gets a product from the very beginning to the very end of its process. This includes the raw materials, suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, customers, and consumers. With all of these different points along the chain, there's a lot of opportunity for someone to be able to attack any one of these and affect anybody else who might be downstream in that chain. One of the reasons this works so well is that we tend to trust what we receive from our suppliers, not realizing, of course, that somewhere up the chain there was an attack that now has shown itself in the equipment, the software, or the technology that we're now putting onto our network. And with so many other steps before that technology arrives on our doorstep, there are plenty of places for an attacker to be able to infect that supply chain. A notable supply chain breach occurred in November of 2013 with the Target Corporation, where 40 million credit card numbers were stolen. This attack did not start at Target. It instead started in Pennsylvania for an HVAC company. That's a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. This is an organization that had people that took care of and maintained the HVAC systems for many of the Target locations. To be able to interact with Target, there was a VPN connection that these technicians would use to be able to send and receive information about these HVAC systems. There was an email with malware that was delivered to this firm in Pennsylvania, and that malware was able to obtain the VPN credentials so that the attackers were able to access the VPN themselves. This was the breach of the supply chain. The attackers were able to take advantage of the HVAC suppliers and gain access to the inside of the Target network. Unfortunately, the Target network did not have any additional security on the inside to prevent vendors from gaining access to other parts of the network. So once the attackers got onto the Target network, they then had access to every single register at all 1,800 Target stores. This is a good example of how a supply chain attack can occur because the attack vector isn't one you were expecting. The folks that are on the roof taking care of the air conditioning and heating are not where you would expect a breach to come that would then attack and steal over 40 million credit cards. Supply chain cybersecurity has become a significant concern for organizations. You have to know and trust that your server, your router, your switch, your firewall, or any of the software you're installing is something that you can trust to put on your network. Many organizations are narrowing down the number of vendors they work with so that they can do more testing and more auditing and make sure that what they're receiving from those suppliers is trusted. Organizations are also requiring that those suppliers have very strict controls over everything that they're doing and that audits can occur within the supplier's network so that everybody can trust exactly what's being delivered to the end user. If you have relationships with your suppliers, this is a good chance to team up with them and make sure that everyone is able to get a safer product all the way through the supply chain.
Sorry about that. I was a little distracted. I have a friend that is on a similar path, a life path that I'm in, and we're both trying to take the same exams or accomplish similar things, and I wanted to get him into my Discord. Um, for those of you that would like to join my Discord, just send me a message, and I'll ask you a couple questions, and we'll get that going here. I do have a couple of rules on my Discord, and I don't want to be too ageist, but I do have a minimum age requirement, as a lot of my community is a bit more mature. If you believe that you are an exception to the rule and whatnot, come talk to me directly and we can discuss this. But otherwise, I try to keep it to the mid 20-year-old and up. A lot of us are in our 30s and have the career thing going on, and like real life commitments, wife, children. I'm solo dolo, but I'm damaged, so that's okay. But anyway, this isn't about me and my lack of a love life. I'm trying to get better with who I am here. So let's go ahead and keep going.
There are two schools of thought when it comes to data security. One school says if you have data that is on site or on premises, that is the most secure way to store data. Another group says that having the data in the cloud is much more advantageous and much more secure for your data. With cloud security, everything is centralized and therefore your costs tend to be lower. You don't have to worry about having your own data center or purchasing any hardware, and you have a third party that handles all of the IT services for you. If all of your data is on site, you obviously have your own data center and you have to incur all of those data center costs, but you know where all of your data is and you're the one who gets to control what happens with that data. Of course, the attackers don't care where your data happens to live. You just have to be sure that it's secure no matter where it's stored. If your data is on premises, you have complete control. You're in charge of the facility, you're in charge of your users and your support team, and you're in charge of what happens with that data. If you have your own team to manage your IT infrastructure, then you get to decide what expertise and what type of security controls are in place. You can hire exactly the right people to make sure that all of your data is secure. But of course, if you're hiring these people and having them on staff, there are additional costs associated with that, especially if you want to get people who are knowledgeable in how to protect data. With all of the data in your local premises, you have a team that can handle all of the uptime and all of the availability. You don't have to call out to a third party to provide any type of maintenance. Since this does rely on your services and your infrastructure, making security changes can also take time. It may take a reconfiguration. You may have to purchase new software or new hardware and have all of that already on site in your premises. If this was a cloud-based service, there may be options for simply clicking a few buttons and adding additional security to your system. In a cloud-based system, you get to control how much security you have on that data. There's usually no physical access to the servers and services that are in these cloud-based systems, although you do have to be concerned that there's a third party that would have access to your data and your systems. One advantage in the cloud is that most cloud providers are providing very large-scale security. They've seen a lot of different security technologies and understand how to implement it to make sure that your data stays secure. One challenge with this is you want to be sure that your users are following best practices for this security in the cloud. There's a different process for accessing this data, and you want to be sure that your users are following the correct processes and procedures to keep that flow of traffic as secure as possible. The data in the cloud also tends to be more available. Since this is a larger infrastructure and much more redundancy is built in, you can usually maintain a higher degree of uptime. Security from a cloud-based provider may also give you some additional options. If you need to install a new third-party firewall, it may just be a click away to bring that firewall online and have it protect your data. This may not be as customizable as it might be inside of your own data center, but it might provide you with some additional options that you wouldn't have if your data was on premises.
There are some vulnerabilities to the cloud. if you create a rogue program that can access, that can authenticate to the cloud API properly, you could still pull data. And clouds are still dangerous because, say you have one file that's stored in a cloud backbone, that cloud file is replicated as many times as there are servers within the backbone. So it actually exists at different places, and there are multiple points of failure. But in order to gain access to a cloud, especially when it's encrypted properly, not as easy. So goes back to what I said from the very beginning. There is no such thing as 100%. If there was such thing as 100%, everybody would be doing it. And the only true 100% way to not get any sort of compromise is to not connect your computer into the internet and use it as a local machine. So
let's say that you've encrypted some data and you've put it into an email and you're sending me this encrypted message. How do we know if that data that you're sending to me was really secure all the way between you and me, and that nobody in the middle was able to gain access to that information? This is the challenge we have when dealing with cryptographic attacks. The attacker often doesn't have the key to be able to decrypt what's there, so instead they use other techniques to try to gain access to the data. Very often, even though they don't have the combination of the safe, they may be able to break in through other parts of the safe to gain access to what's inside. Attackers spend a lot of time trying to find inconsistencies, problems, and cryptographic vulnerabilities with these methods that we use to transfer data from point A to point B. And very often it's not the cryptography that's the problem, it's the way that we've implemented the cryptography that allows the attackers to gain access to the data. One type of attack is the birthday attack. And the birthday attack is based around this particular problem. You have a classroom of 23 students. What is the chance that 2 students in the classroom share a birthday? The answer is 50%, which is a pretty high number considering there's only 23 students. If we had 30 students, this would increase to about 70% of a chance. That's because we're not comparing 2 individual students to see if they share a birthday. We're comparing every student to every other student to see if there's a shared birthday. In the digital world, we call this a hash collision. A hash collision is when you have 2 very different types of plain text, but both of those plain texts create exactly the same hash. This is something that should never happen. And if we're able to find a hash collision, we may be able to take advantage of this inconsistency in the hash algorithm.
Yep.
With a hash collision, the attacker spends their time finding that other type of plain text that matches that hash. One way to prevent this is to increase the size of the hash, which decreases the potential to have a collision. Collisions are bad because the hashes are always supposed to be a unique value. If you put in one type of plain text, it should be a unique hash. If you put in a different plain text, it should never be exactly the same hash. One well-known collision hash occurred with MD5. This was the Message Digest Algorithm version 5, which was first published in April of 1992, and we identified collisions with this hashing algorithm in 1996. Researchers were able to expand on this hash collision, and in December of 2008, they created a certificate authority certificate that appeared legitimate if you looked at the MD5 hash. So they were effectively able to create a fake certificate authority that looked like a completely legitimate CA. This is obviously going to create some significant concerns if you're relying on these CA signatures for the trust of your website certificates. Here's an example of a collision that occurs with MD5. These are 2 separate inputs, and you can see they're mostly similar, but there are some differences between the 2 that are highlighted in red. If you perform an MD5 hash against both of these, you should receive a very different hash, but in reality, you receive exactly the same hash, and that is a hash collision. Another type of attack is a downgrade attack. Normally, when you want to communicate securely to another device, there's a conversation that initially takes place where both sides determine what the best possible encryption algorithm might be. If you're able to somehow sit in the middle and influence that conversation, you could have the two sides downgrade to a type of encryption that might be very easy to break. A popular example of downgrade attack occurred in 2014. These were researchers that found a vulnerability in the transport layer security. This was the security that was the successor to SSL, or secure sockets layer, or the encryption mechanism that we use to communicate to web servers. They were able to sit in the middle of a conversation between two devices that would be an on-path attack, and they forced the two sides to communicate at a much downgraded level of encryption. They fell back to SSL version 3.0. Well, with SSL 3.0, there are some significant cryptographic vulnerabilities, which is why we don't use SSL 3.0 any longer. And because of that, the rest of the conversation was one that was susceptible to being decrypted by the third party. After this particular vulnerability was released, we all configured our web servers not to allow SSL 3.0. We changed our browser configuration, and these days it's very difficult to find a browser that even supports SSL 3.0, all because of this poodle downgrade attack.
Okay. I'm definitely starting to lose some focus here, guys. So yeah. Yeah, I am going to probably well, I haven't eaten yet, so I'm probably going to stop this here today. Because yeah, I kind of want to eat something and get that going, and then I have a little bit of life that I have to lead here. But thank you for tuning in today. I really appreciate everybody that interacted with me today. Let me give a couple of shout outs here. I want to give a shout out to Soundbank Beats, my friend Gary. He's the one who's been supplying me with the music that's been changing and I've been playing with on my streams. Give him a like, give him a follow. It's Soundbank Beats. Once again, I'll probably try to edit a graphic here and post his logo on there to give proper due credit. Shout out to my boy Webb and Finley. Webb, I didn't realize that you were watching, but thank you for letting me know that I should probably give a little bit of a debrief so that I can check my learning here. And Finlay, I know that you and I are on the same path here for cybersecurity aspirations, so welcome to the fold. For everybody that wants to join my stuff, I am very active on my Discord. I stream here on YouTube and then on evenings on Twitch. With that said, tonight I'm not going to stream. I'm going to have somebody over and just going to hang out. I'm going to probably pick up my night streaming tomorrow, and every morning I'm trying to do, a little bit of enrichment. My thing is I really want to get this done. I'm seeing this downtime as an opportunity to enrich my life. So I'm trying to fully immerse myself in this subject matter in hopes of, escalating my career here and moving on to that next step. So thank you all for your loving words and kind support. Enjoy the rest of your morning. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day. I'll see you guys soon.